Most founders think like this: if our product is capable, we will win. More features, more flexibility, more use cases. That's how most B2B products are built. But here's the problem. In crowded markets, capability doesn't make you memorable. And if you're not remembered, you don't get chosen. So in this video, I want to break down the story of Stripe. Not from a product lens, but from how buyers actually think. Stripe is proof that better capability alone doesn't win. Because when Stripe started, payments already existed, strong players existed, infrastructure existed. So why did Stripe become the default? What did they see the others didn't? Here's the disconnect I keep seeing. Founders think they're competing on capability, but buyers don't experience capability first. They experience friction first. Something slow, something unclear, something painful in their workflow. And at that moment, they're not thinking who has the best product. They're thinking, what will fix this quickly? That's where decisions actually start. Not at the product level, but at the point where something feels broken. Stripe didn't enter the payments market. They entered a very specific moment inside it. Because businesses did not really have a payments problem. They had this is very painful to integrate and it's slowing us down problem. And that's a completely different game. Because now you're not competing with every other payment provider. You're competing to remove a very specific bottleneck. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most companies avoid going this deep. Not because they don't understand it, but because they don't fully trust it. They're not sure, is this problem big enough? Is this just one customer story? What if we narrow too much? So instead, they stay at the outcome level, like grow revenue, scale faster, improve efficiency, because it feels safe. You don't have to exclude anyone here. But that's also why nobody remembers you. And if I'm being honest, a lot of founders today are operating in markets where everything looks similar. The product looks similar, the messaging sounds similar. So it's hard to point out at one thing and say, this is the problem. And when you're not fully convinced, you compensate. You add more features, more use cases, more audiences. You try to cover more ground instead of owning one. But here's what Stripe did differently. They didn't guess the problem. They kept seeing the same friction again and again. In integrations, in delays, in developer effort, until it became obvious. And once it becomes obvious, you don't have a messaging problem anymore. You have a decision to make. Stripe made the decision. When everyone else was explaining what their product can do, Stripe focused on where things break. Let me show you what that actually looks like. At the top, everyone is saying the same thing: accept payments, grow revenue. This is where most companies stay because it's safe. Stripe went one level deeper. They asked, where is the friction? Not payments, but integration. And then even deeper, what's actually causing that friction? Time and complexity for developers. Most companies stop here. Stripe did not. Instead of selling payments, they built developer-first APIs. This is where they won. So it's not the product that made them different, it's the level they choose to operate at. Everyone else was talking about outcomes. Stripe anchored itself where the problem becomes real. And that is important because this is exactly where memory forms. Not when somebody hears a promise, but when they recognize a problem. When they go, this is exactly what's slowing us down. Now that's when you get remembered. And once you're remembered, you get considered even before comparison starts. Now, here's the part most founders feel but don't always say out loud. The moment this clicks to you as a founder, you realize what it actually demands. You can't talk to everyone, you can't solve everything, you can't keep all doors open. And yeah, that's uncomfortable because it feels like you're shrinking your opportunity. But here's what most founders get wrong. This is not a trade-off between wide opportunity and narrow focus. It's a trade-off between slow growth and compounding growth. When you try to be relevant everywhere, you're constantly starting from zero. Every conversation is new, every explanation is repeated, every deal takes effort. That's friction. But when you become known for one thing in one place, something very different happens. Memory starts to build, and memory compounds, which means less explaining, faster recognition, shorter sales cycles, more inbound relevance. You're not shrinking your opportunity, you're choosing where growth becomes easier. Think of it like lanes on a highway. You can technically drive across all lanes, but you can't move fast that way. Speed comes from committing to one lane. So this isn't about saying no to growth. It's about saying yes to a lane where growth actually compounds. Let me take a few steps back. Most companies don't just say more. They rush to feel relevant to as many people in as many situations as possible. So they talk about everything, every feature, every use case, every industry. Because the fear is, if we don't say this, we might miss an opportunity. But what this actually creates is something else. It turns your product into a menu, like at a food court, where the buyer has to look at everything, figure out what applies, ignore what doesn't, and decide if any of it is worth their time. And here's what really happens. Most buyers don't do that work. They don't filter, they don't evaluate, they just leave. This shows up as low time spent on your website, no clear conversion from your website, no one referencing your messaging. Because you don't make it easier to understand, you make it harder to choose. And here's the deeper issue. Different companies might want different things. But across an industry, what's always common is the outcome. So when everyone talks about outcomes, everyone sounds the same. And when everyone sounds the same, no one gets remembered. So the real question is, how do you actually find a problem worth owning? Not guessing, not broad positioning, not trying to cover everything, but something real enough that people recognize instantly. Here's a simple way to think about it. If your product disappeared tomorrow, what problem would become unbearable? Not just inconvenient, but truly unbearable. The kind that slows teams down, creates delays, forces workarounds, keeps showing up again and again. That's your signal, because that's where Stripe started. Not at the outcome, but at the point where things break. And when you anchor yourself there, you don't need to explain everything. The buyer does that work for you. They recognize a problem and they remember you for it. And that's the shift from being one of many options to being the obvious one.